Hello, this is Capital Ideas Live, the video version of the magazine for people doing business in Moscow who want to do business in Moscow. I'm John Harrison.
The most popular spots in Moscow, the days of old and the technology of the future. Why does the Pushkin Museum need a heap of furniture? The Russian avant-garde is truly radical. The director of the Italian Institute of Culture in Moscow on the digital era. The more borders are blurred, the more you want to find your identity. Watch it now. Capital Ideas Live.
Sometimes in the centre of Moscow you bump into tourists with cameras and sure, sometimes it can be annoying, but then each picture that each of those tourists takes builds up into a kind of image of Moscow, and that's very interesting. So our next report's going to be about those images, those impressions that people get when they come to Moscow.
In 2016, Moscow became one of the top 3 most popular cities in the world, according to the Instagram photo service. One of its most popular spots is Zaryadye Park. On the park's opening day alone, users published over 16,000 photos and videos with the hashtag Zaryadye. An enormous number of people, both Muscovites and tourists, love to visit it. They discover some absolutely unique natural views and views of the historic centre of Moscow. This is the new face of Moscow and the entire country. It's also a view of the city through space and time made possible by modern technologies. Don't forget to buckle up and to check in. The main features in the park at present are the glass bark structure with its viewing platform, an amphitheatre that provides unique views of the park, the floating bridge which opens an entirely new panorama of the Kremlin onto Kotelnicheskaya embankment. Located next to Zaryadye, Red Square, of course, is in a totally different league. Together with the Kremlin, it's referred to in almost 3 million posts. That speaks for itself.
Hello, my dear friends. My name is Vladimir Vashchenko, and today I'll be your guide during our excursion around Moscow.
Unlike the well-thought-out and shiny innovation of Zaryadye, the old Arbat region is the capital city's living museum.
A long time ago, it was the first road which was leading from Moscow to different Western countries.
The great people who once lived here are regarded as neighbours here, and the locals are ready to tell loads of stories about them.
Nicholas I didn't like Pushkin because of his oppositional opinions.
That's why Stary Arbat will always attract artists, writers and lovers of excursions. What are the top 5 sites in Moscow? The Arbat district is in 5th place. In 4th, it's the renowned Gorky Park. In 3rd, it's the Kremlin. Red Square only makes it to 2nd place. What's in 1st place? In recent years, the VDNKH Park has quickly pulled ahead to take the leader spot. Soviet architecture, an abundance of greenery, sports arenas, restaurants and attractions, they've all provided VDNKH with the 1st place in Moscow's rating of popular sites. It's even 10th in the world.
And now we're talking to Mr. Sergei Shpilko, the head of the Russian Union of the Travel Industry. Minister Shpilko, Moscow is the most popular city of Russia for tourist visits. What do they want here? Antiques, Soviet exotics, blinis and pies maybe?
If we're talking about city tourism, then first and foremost it's impressions, and they should be unique. It doesn't matter if it's the Great Wall of China, the pyramids, the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, or New York's skyscrapers. It's not a matter of them being wonderful in themselves, it's down to their being one of a kind. Leninsky Prospect or Leningradsky, they're avenues unlike anything else you'll find in the world. There are no other streets of the scale of Leninsky Prospect, the longest street in Europe, and there are no other streets with such buildings in the Stalinist empire style. For tourists with a more refined feeling for architecture, I mean tourists, this is the Russian avant-garde style. It's constructivism. In Moscow there are over 100 monuments of Soviet constructivism. And that's appreciated around the world, even more than it is in Russia.
So, whom does Moscow suit the best? Is it better for the rich retired or for young students, perhaps?
We're particularly pleased by the huge increase in youths. No other city in the world has even close to the quantity of hostels that Moscow has. And that's great for the future. As for new trends, we never thought that in 2 to 3 years, the geography of the countries from which tourists are coming to Russia would expand so sharply. Obviously, China is in first place. Over 6 years, it's gone from 60,000 to over 500,000. And there's going to be another 30% bump in the number of Chinese tourists. Visa-free countries such as Israel, South Korea, that's really great. Germany is in second place. But there are also people visiting us from Pakistan, from the Philippines, the Emirates, from Algeria. Were we expecting tour groups from Algeria? For us, in some sense, this is a surprise and a challenge. It's a question of translation.
Now, I've heard that Moscow now has a division of the Moscow police that works with tourists. What do they do?
It's a police force. They patrol predominantly in zones where there are a lot of tourists, and particularly wealthy tourists who aren't with guides. So they don't have guides holding them by the hand the whole time. So their task is really to provide consultations more than anything else. I'd say that this is another form of providing more care for the capital's guests.
Now, Russians distinguish between Moscow and St. Petersburg. According to this idea, Moscow is the business center of commercial life with offices everywhere, and St. Petersburg is the grand center of Russian artistic and cultural life with theaters, galleries, museums, and so on. But cultural life has now moved down to Moscow. At least that's what Muscovites think.
The event of the month in Moscow was the exhibition by the Japanese Andy Warhol, Takashi Murakami, at the Garage Modern Art Center. It's for an encounter with the modern that people go to Moscow nowadays. The Museum of Modern Art is in as much demand as the classical Tretyakov Gallery. The Pushkin Museum, where works by Renoir and Rembrandt are kept, allowed its facade to be covered with an installation by the artist Tsai Gotsan, not waiting for the years to pass before it becomes a classic. After all, 100 years ago, nobody knew that Malevich and Kandinsky would become Russian brands in the world. The Black Square today is up there alongside the Red Stars and Golden Onion domes. The Russian avant-garde is one of the most radical visual movements of the 20th century, and it had a huge influence on Western art and on our Russian art. You can take a ride underground on the Russian avant-garde. And you can take a little part home as a souvenir. We've got badges featuring the avant-garde, collected at the Tretyakov Gallery. Badges with the main architectural monuments, Moscow State University, the Ostankino Tower, the Spasskaya Tower. In Moscow, everything possible has been done to ensure that lovers of modern art come here from all over the world. Coming from London, it's much easier to visit the Takashi Murakami exhibition here than to go to Tokyo. There's certainly no cultural barrier. All of the texts are translated into English, that's obligatory, and we have an audio guide in English. You can take excursions in English, German, or French.
The person we're going to be talking to next came to Russia because of its culture, but she also loves to talk about her own country and culture. Olga Strada, the chief of the Italian Institute of Culture in Moscow. The Russians already love Italy and all things Italian. They love your literature, fashion. So what is your mission here?
My mission as the director of the Institute of Culture is to organize the showing of the full palette of Italian culture. And that means organizing exhibitions, festivals of Italian film. I invite in writers. We do that for the Russians, but nevertheless, the Italians who live in Moscow love coming along. It allows a lot of people to get to know the key figures in Italian culture. It would be a lot harder to meet them personally in Italy.
In our digital era, does culture really have national borders?
The subject of borders is fascinating and very timely. On the one hand, so-called globalization took place thanks to the digital revolution, washing away borders. It's as if they don't exist. But the paradox is that the more borders are blurred, the more you want to find your identity. You want to describe more accurately that which is closer to your culture, that which is closer to your existence.
So you're at Strada. All your life you've belonged to two different cultures, Russian and Italian. How different are they? What common ground do they have?
My father is an Italian and my mother is Russian. And I have to say that that mixture exists in me, within me. There's more that links the Russian and Italian peoples than separates them. I think that Italians are very pragmatic. Russians are people of the word. They really like to talk about things. And then, of course, and modern Russian culture proves this, Russian people take a long time building up, and then they really set off at a pace. That really is the case. Moscow, a capital or a state within a state?
Moscow can be considered very healthy economy and one of the most healthiest in the world.
The Minister of the Moscow government, Sergei Cheryomin, answers questions. Next time on Capital Ideas Live.
So that's it, our program's come to an end. I hope you've enjoyed it. Tune in again next week. I'm John Harrison.